We're back 25 after the hour, and now that the Mueller investigation is over, the focus will soon shift to the other open investigations, as we've been talking about, and to Congress. The first priority on the Hill is to make sure the report is released to the public, as evidenced by the flurry of calls late today for transparency. There's a small sampling. There are 4 separate House and Senate committee investigations into this president and his dealings currently underway. The chairs of 2 of those committees hinted tonight at what is next.
The Attorney General committed to making as much of it public as was consistent with law or policy. If he's true to that, it means the entire thing. The Congress is going to need the underlying evidence, because some of that evidence may go to the compromise of the president or people around him that poses a real threat to our national security.
The Mueller report concerns only crimes that may have been committed. Our constitutional mandate is to look at, is to maintain the rule of law, which means examining not only crimes but other abuses of power and obstructions of justice.
Again, there are active investigations in the Southern District of New York and the New York Attorney General and the U.S. attorneys in the District of Columbia and the Commonwealth of Virginia. With us to talk about all of it, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at CIA and Pentagon, former chief counsel House Intel, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, who spent 25 years as a federal prosecutor, and Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence. Gang, I'm going to ask you all the same questions, so fair warning. This is a big day for law, so we're going to be fair here, too. What was the biggest moment or revelation? And do any of you have a lingering question from today that you would like answered? And home field advantage being what it is, Counselor, Joyce, you go first.
I think the most significant thing we learned today came in Attorney General Barr's letter that was sent to congressional leaders. In that first paragraph, the first thing he told them was that there had been no request from Bob Mueller that was denied. So no request to indict or perhaps to subpoena a president that was denied. That was important for the Attorney General to say. But with that said, there are an enormous number of lingering questions. So many loose ends for this investigation, both those that involve Russia and those that involve the other cases. This is unlike any other special counsel or independent counsel case. There are lingering investigations, as you say, all over the country and on the Hill, and more questions left to ask than have been answered.
Jeremy Bash, same question.
Yeah, I think what was significant to me, Brian, was that there is a report, that there is detail in Bob Mueller's findings, that he's presented that to the Attorney General. And now it's up to, I think, the Attorney General to disclose all of the entirety of that report to Congress and to the American people. I think it's going to be a very unsatisfactory situation. I think it's going to be, frankly, a constitutional crisis if the Attorney General, who is a presidential appointee handpicked by Donald Trump, tries to shield these findings from Congress and the American people.
Frank, same question.
Yeah, so the mystery's not yet solved. The biggest revelation today, no more indictments, as has been reported, but the mystery that remains, the gap in our knowledge, simply where we go from here with seeming loose ends that have not yet wrapped up.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.